The hour 10:15 having arrived, we'll call the House Tax Committee to order. If Chair Gomez could move the minutes from Wednesday.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
So what's the date on Wednesday?
February.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Gomez, February the 18th, Tuesday. So Chair Gomez moves the minutes. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, these are from February 18th, 2025. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. So today's agenda, members, we will not be voting on any bills or laying any bills over. We have two great presentations, one from the counties, Matt Hilgart and Nathan Jessen, and the other is from the cities, Beth Johnson and Pierre Willette. So with that being said, I think we'll get right into it. So there's no bills to move. So please introduce yourself for the record, gentlemen, and proceed. And members, you should have in your packet their PowerPoint. And I guess it's up on the PowerPoint where PowerPoints go. Okay, so we have it right in front of you here too. So who'd like to start, gentlemen?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Matt Hilgart. I work for the Association of Minnesota Counties. AMC represents all of Minnesota's 87 counties, and I'm here with my colleague and friend.
Nathan Jessen. I represent the Minnesota Inter-County Association. MICA is an organization of 17 of the largest counties in Minnesota outside of Ramsey and Hennepin.
Welcome to the committee. Who'd like to start?
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for entertaining a whole committee hearing to presentations from local government groups. It's not often we get a whole full committee hearing to talk about what we do, who we are, and some of our needs, and we really, in a property tax and tax context, and we really appreciate that opportunity. So today, before you, we have a little bit of a slideshow presentation. They should be in front of you, and I'll do my best to pilot this from behind the column. But we are going to be introducing kind of just county governments at a very high level, the role of counties in property taxes, some important property tax principles that we'd love for you to keep in mind as we go through this biennium. Some recent impacts on property taxes. I'm sure all of you have had a lot of questions from constituents or residents about some values or shifts or increases in property taxes. A review of some of the governor's budget impacts on county operations and levies, and then just some of our priorities as we look to this session. General county duties. It's no secret that county government is one of the least understood layers of county government. We're very frequently called that invisible layer of government. Folks are pretty familiar with their city governments. It's very visible, or the state government, but county is this in between. When it's convenient for a local government, when it's convenient for another party, we're an arm of the state. But in reality, we are tasked with administering some of the state's largest social safety net programs. And Minnesota is unique. We fall in the minority of states where the states say, you know what, counties, we're gonna give you these responsibilities. In many other states around the nation, the state takes on a lot of these tasks, but in Minnesota, and we would agree, we give these tasks to counties. We think we do it more efficiently, but we also think we do it with a local flavor and context of who our residents are, what those needs are, and ability to respond quicker to those needs. So at a very high level, counties, of course, for this committee's jurisdiction, administer the property tax system, land, deed, vital records. We run elections along with our city and townships and school districts, and I see a election chair in this room as well. Member, sorry, yes. We also have a significant role in the public safety system, not just our dispatchers and our sheriff's office, but also probation and corrections. So if anyone sits on the Public Safety Committee, you'll know that Minnesota stands as one of the lowest per capita rates of incarceration. We do a lot of our work surrounded around the idea of resiliency and getting folks back to community. That requires a lot of work from county probation and correction officers, and so we are very involved in that work. We, of course, have a lot of miles, in fact, the most of all local governments and the state of highways, bridges, roads. We run our workforce development programs and the dislocated worker program. We're often the public health authority, although there are some cities, I believe 4 or 5 cities that have a local public health department. Otherwise, it's all county run. We administer tax forfeited properties. Sorry about that one last year. We provide an array of social services, including housing, social services, supports, child protection, family services, mental health, and well-being. This array, you'll recognize your counties are really growing in this area. We're growing because of needs. If you were to take a walk through Scott County's community center, you'd all of a sudden notice there's an entire wing of doctors and accredited social workers who are actually providing mental health services. That's because we are not finding enough state support to deliver these critical services. And so counties are actually getting into models where you wouldn't actually think of us as operating in that circle, but that's because there's no one fulfilling the need in these areas. Solid waste and recycling management is one where folks don't really understand the full role, but we have a huge role and actually run a lot of institutions and infrastructures around our solid waste and recycling management. We have our libraries, which we all love, including the law libraries, which is a mandate of ours that we function. Elected officers, which we still have at our layer of government, the county sheriff, the county attorney's office. And then I like this kind of fallback. We are kind of seen in this state, and even in this committee sometimes, of we need someone to do this. Who's going to do it? And sometimes and oftentimes that does fall to us. One of the examples that I like to say in this is indigent funeral costs. So Minnesota has a premise that, you know what, if you can't afford a burial, a respectful burial for your family members, the state's gonna help you out on that. We do that. The state asks us to take that on. We get no aid for it. And in fact, in some cases, it's extremely costly. Because we do communicate with the families. We try to acquiesce to the wishes that they have. In St. Louis County, Representative Kozlowski's district, this can run anywhere from $300,000 to $600,000 a year. That's real money, but it's something that we do on behalf of the state.
Great. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the county's role in property taxes specifically that this committee has jurisdiction over. You know, the counties are really kind of the implementers of the system. You know, you all pass laws, make sure the system looks like you want it to look like. The Department of Revenue provides guidance to county assessors and county auditors, but counties are the ones that are making sure the system is working as the law intends it to work. So that starts with assessing, right? County assessors determine the classification, the use. If you're familiar with that property tax classification table from the Department of Revenue, we've got, I think, somewhere around 55 classification rates, a lot of different types of property, whether you're talking about 2B or 4D. There's a lot of different classifications, so it's the county assessors and auditors that are trying to make sure that the property is classified correctly, and then also calculating the tax rate, right? There's a lot of information that goes out to taxpayers about their property taxes. You know, there's your valuation statement, your truth in taxation notice, the truth in taxation hearings, and it all is kind of on a timeline, which I'll get to in a second here, that counties are really the ones implementing, whether it's them showing up and assessing or them mailing the notice to the taxpayer saying, here's what's going on with your value this year. That's the county that's doing that. It's also worth noting that the county's collecting the property taxes, and not just for the county, right? The county collects property taxes for the city, the township, special taxing districts like watershed districts or HRAs, and also notably the state. The state does have a state general property tax, sometimes referred to as the state general levy, and the county collects that and remits that to the state. So it's the county's job to do all those things in the property tax system. So it's really the county's kind of the biggest administrator when it comes to property taxes. So I started talking a little bit about the timeline. This kind of gives you an idea of what that property tax timeline looks like. And just the first thing that's really important is that this is a 2-year timeline, right? So you're getting that valuation notice in March of year 1. And, you know, there's ways of contesting your valuation if you have concerns of that. There's an appeals process that goes through the county if you think that valuation doesn't reflect your true value. And then by the time we get, you know, and then you've got counties setting their levy during the late summer and early fall. The proposed tax statement is going out in November, usually mid to late November, saying, okay, here's what you're going to owe next year based on your value, and then you're gonna get that tax statement, that final tax statement in March, because final levies aren't set till December. The preliminary levies are getting set usually in September, final levies getting set in December. Sometimes those tick down a little bit.
Just kind of a warning. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a warning slide here. I think most members on this committee are very well aware of this, but I'm sure during the fall when you were knocking doors or out in community, you heard a lot about property tax increases or just pressures even. You may have even heard folks who were attending their truth in taxation hearings, which was pretty popular this year and widely covered across the state. An important reminder that market value increase don't necessarily equate to the same property tax increase. Counties are, I think, sometimes too eager to send out tons and tons of information. But when we send out our value notices, I think it's a good information for folks to see where their house values, et cetera, are. But it sometimes makes people think, oh my gosh, I got a 15% increase in my value. I can't afford a 15% increase in property taxes. And this slide really is a hold on. It's not as simple as that. And it may not be that equivalent. So as we go to an example, and I'm sorry, this is a little murky, but I'm going to provide just an example real quick of kind of how value might or may not change your actual property tax liability. So in this example, I'm using a theoretical 4-house community. That's it, 4 homes. The levy for this community is $4,000 from the government. And so if each home, if all homes are equal, right, in terms of value, and they're splitting that $4,000 tax levy, each home would get $1,000 tax. Now, things can change that. You can see in each of these homes, there's a blue, an orange, a gray, and a yellow home. I show on the second line, let's change their estimated market value. You can see that first blue home, we're gonna give them a 50% increase in their value. The orange home, we're gonna leave the same. And the gray home, we're gonna give us a little bit of an increase, and the yellow the same. You can see that orange home, even if their value didn't change at all, they're actually seeing a 20% reduction in this hypothetical. And that's because the other homes around them are increasing value. So that share of the property tax pie here is being eaten up by different homes. You can use this example if you extrapolate it to other classifications too. So if residential is struggling, but commercial industry is doing well, that share of the property tax pie by commercial industry is growing, and they may be taking on more of that tax burden. So it plays out. The other thing that you could use this with is if we were to say this 4-town home, let's say, for example, this committee has worked on this a lot, one of these homes has a disabled veterans market value exclusion. All of a sudden, there's that home's value, because it goes up to either 150,000 exclusion or 300,000 exclusion, would be completely exempt from basically property taxes. That value would be excluded from taxation. So all of a sudden then, there would be a 30% increase in each property's assessment because of that exclusion. So you can see, and of course this is maximized because we're only in a 4-home community, but you can see how exclusions also play a role in what someone's property taxes may or may not be.
Mr. Jessen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to talk a little bit about property tax levies, kind of the historical trends over the last 25 or so years. This chart shows you the county levy increases. These are statewide numbers, statewide averages per year. And then it also, just for context, puts in kind of other local government levy increases. So that would be cities, school districts, townships, special taxing districts. And I just think what's notable here is that, I would say generally when there's certain things that are going to drive county levies a little bit higher during certain times, and that those are things like inflation or unfunded mandates, right? You can see when unfunded mandates or reduction in aid. When one of those 3 things are occurring, we tend to see property tax levies increase more than they otherwise would. When county tax levies are lower and local government levies are generally lower, well, that's going to be times when we have when things are more difficult in the state economically, right? I think there were a lot of concerns, and so if you look at, there's a big dip in 2021. That's largely due to county commissioners looking at what they were hearing from their constituents and saying like, okay, well, right now there's a lot of uncertainty. Levies are going to be lower, and trying to be as responsive to their constituents as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some market observations. I've had a lot of good conversations. I know Nathan has, Mr. Jessen has too, about just what we're seeing market value-wise. And I did steal both this slide and the one about just tax values from the Minnesota Association of assessing officers. They're a great group of professional, nonpartisan assessors, highly accredited. We talked about that earlier this week, and they really do implement the property tax system at a local level. And so these observations are from these professionals that I'm just trying to give a high-level summary of. Seasonal rec has been one of these class growths that we've seen a lot of. I know some of you in this room have a lot of cabin or seasonal rec properties in your district. We have seen values just explode, particularly after the pandemic. In Cass County alone, the square footage, the price per square foot on a lake has grown significantly. Let's give Gull Lake for an example. In 2014, price per square foot on Gull Lake was $4,800. In 2024, it's $12,000. So they've seen a 150% increase on their lakeshore value properties. In Cass County alone, seasonal rec is about 50% of their entire tax base. So these properties are also taking on more of the tax liability. And so these values have held. We have not seen a dip and are really post-pandemic just holding high. Egg prices are also holding strong. I know there's a lot of folks representing agricultural counties right now. We saw an increase in the 2016s and 15s of getting to Rock County or Laverne area of $16,000 or $17,000 per acre sales. Those have stayed or even grown in some cases. And so we aren't seeing the volatility or reduction in ag land growth that we sometimes are accustomed to every 5 or so years. Egg prices are still staying relatively high. The office market is one that we get a lot of questions about, and I'm sure some of you have seen some of the reporting, especially in some of our metropolitan areas. There have been some notable sales of late, which do appear well below the last sale prices or ratios that they've had in the past. There's no secret that office market is just changing, particularly for downtown. But I would say two things. The office market may be changing in downtown, but their use is also changing. So we're seeing a difference of these office buildings potentially being sold at a lower market, much lower than their previous sale price. But there's tens of millions of dollars being put into them to redevelop them into residential units. So their use is changing, and that value might be changing, but it might not be completely eliminating. The other thing to keep into context is even if, let's take a real sale that occurred in Hennepin County, downtown Minneapolis, even if a reduction in value is occurring to 70 or 80 or 90%, we have to take that into effect of the entire tax base. That sale matters and will be reducing the value and potentially shifting. But in other parts of the county, commercial may be holding strong or actually increasing. So I believe Hennepin County's net commercial change this year is around just minus 2% reduction. And in addition, industrial properties have actually grown a little bit in value. So again, with that shift that happens, but other classes could actually take that. Now, if you're in Ramsey County or a smaller tax base, that volatility may be more severe and more significant, and that shift could be more severe and impactful.
Before going to Mr. Justin, I should announce to the committee that we had said that we're going to let you go through the whole presentation. So if you could jot down, we'll get to everybody here when they're finished. Mr. Justin.
Great. I just wanted to add a couple more thoughts on what we're seeing in the market. So 2 years ago, I came before this committee and testified about a really significant increase in residential homestead valuation. We were coming off of a 17.5% jump in residential homestead valuation 2 years ago. That's really leveled out now. I think the most recent assessment year sees us somewhere between 1.5%, 2% on average statewide. Of course, there's going to be some variation in that. And the other thing that's, of course, notable is that it's not like, when I say leveling out, it's not like the residential valuations went back down 17.5%, right? They're just not increasing at that same level anymore. But I do think that that's been something that is a notable readjustment, realignment in the property tax system, not seeing those big spikes in residential valuations in a way that we were 2 to 3 years ago. The only other just final note on this is the apartment values in the most recent assessment year are actually down slightly. I think it's something like negative 3.2%. And that is notable just because they're the only classification type this most recent assessment year that actually adjusted downward on average.
Recent property tax changes, we want to thank this committee. It's been noted many times that this committee is one of the best committees to be in, and there's a strong history of bipartisan work. I think we would agree, and this slide is a testament to that. The things that are on this slide were supported in a bipartisan fashion, and I think it was really good work. A lot of these changes are, 2023 tax bill, but they were really good. This committee worked to increase the property tax refund, increase the homestead exclusion, work on the targeted property tax refund, which is a lesser known but equally important refund, and also helps you all when you're communicating with your constituents to say, hey, did your bill really go up more than 10%? Is it 10 or 12%? Did it really go up more than 10%? And if so, you can qualify for a refund on a portion of those taxes. And lastly, we are biased, but the work that this committee has done to support things like county program aid and local government aids, that's critical for our work, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more today.
Mr. Jessen.
Yeah, so on that note, and this is just something that's just largely true of cities in general, is that the level of investment that the state makes and things like county program aid is not as high as it was historically compared to 25 years ago. Now, I think that these slides show that. Now, I would say that especially since 2017, the legislature has done a much better job of investing in county program aid specifically, and that's something that we're very appreciative of, and something where county program aid, when we've been looking at increasing state aids, we're looking at county program aid in a similar way to local government aid, and that wasn't always the case prior to 2017. But as you can see, the buying power for county program aid is down significantly, whether you're looking at it as a percentage of the levy as compared to inflation or compared to the state's general fund budget. No matter which way you slice it, these percentages are down. But like I said, since 2017, the legislature has done a better job of addressing CPA specifically.
And I wanted to take an example, Mr. Chair, to give you an example and the committee of just what a local community, what this looks like for a local community, and put yourselves in a county board chair. It's not as comfortable as the chairs in these rooms, but put yourself in that chair and say, what would we do with this volatility of this relationship? Here is a chart of Representative Swazinski's, one of his counties, and that is Lac-Qui-Parle County. If you look at the blue lines alone, you can see the total aid value, and this does not account for inflation. This would be even more severe if you did that. But in 2005, that county received $800,000 in CPA. At the lowest trough of this, they received just over $100,000. So that's almost, an 80% reduction of their aid in a given 5 or 6 year increase. It wasn't until a CPA bill that had many co-authors and even an author in this committee that changed that and got that aid back. But even today, even after the good work the last biennium, their aid is still less than 2005 levels and is much less if you put the inflation on it. The orange line just shows you that CPA as a percentage of Lac-Qui-Parle County's levy. And here you could see at the height of it, it was close to 30%. At the bottom of it, it was around 2% of their levy, and now it's around 10%. The relationship between CPA and a county's levy is a troubled relationship. We'd like to keep working on it. For our particular aid, counties are lucky if their CPA is around 4 or 5% of their total budget expenditures, where our city friends and colleagues certainly have an equally compelling case to be made, but in some cases there you can be looking at 20 or 35% of the levy. It's important for all of our local governments to get resources, cities, counties, schools too, but we'd like to work to also correct some of those numbers. And the last thing I'll say is the work that you did, and Mr. Jensen recognized this in the last tax bill, was really important. We want to thank you all for that. That was a historic amount of aid. There's an author in the room today, I'm seeing in the gallery too, who helped lead some of those efforts, along with a lot of names at this table. But the stability in our formula has been corrected. And a good example of this is when you put in $80 million of new CPA resources, almost every single county saw a 30% increase. So there wasn't a volatility. If you look at the charts of winners or losers, there wasn't any. Everyone was at basically 30%, 30.1 or 30.7. There were a couple outliers, but the vast majority of folks were right in that 30 to 31%. That talks about the stability of the current formula.
And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the governor's budget and the implications it has for counties. So the governor's budget essentially shifts a lot of the costs to counties when it comes to implementing these programs, or just kind of creates cost shares where they didn't exist before. Now, I'm not going to talk specifically about each of these because this is not HHS committee, but these changes do have really significant impacts potentially for the jurisdiction of this committee. But because if anytime you're getting a property tax change revenue estimate from the Department of Revenue that's changing something in the classification system or providing an exemption where one didn't exist before, you would show a property tax refund interaction, right? When you provide a special benefit to one type of property, it's going to increase property taxes on homeowners, and property tax refunds go up. That costs the state money. This represents a $200 million shift, over a $200 million shift, a biennium when fully phased in. And this would be a significant increase, not only in property tax refunds for the state, but just in property taxes across the state. Mr. Hilgart's going to talk a little bit about the impact in each county, but the shift here is on a very big scale. We're very appreciative of the $80 million increase in county program aid. That was historical, but this is on a much larger scale than even that.
Thank you, Mr. Jessen. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hilgert?
Here's a slide that just goes over some of these impacts, and I can get more information. We did do a survey the last couple of weeks. We probably have about 40, close to 50 responses. But I think these county examples illustrate kind of what Mr. Jessen just went over. Let's take the first one right here, and that is Dakota County. They've assessed that when the shifts are fully in place, it's $11.5 million in new costs for the county. 10.5 of that alone is just the 5% disability waiver, 5% cost shift for us. To put it in context for Dakota County, that's more than their libraries budget, their parks budget, their public disease control and local public health budget, and their snow ice removal budget for their entire county. It would also mean that it would be a 7% levy increase. And I think one thing that we are going to be pretty firm on is that we disagree that we have a flexibility or an ability to actually layer these cuts or change our services. We see this as no, continue to do the services and the mandates and do the disability waiver assessments that you're doing, but you're just going to pay, your property taxpayers are just going to pay for those services more. In Anoka County, it's an $8 million increase in their property tax liability and a 5% increase to the levy alone. To put it in context too, Anoka's CPA increase in the 2023 bill was $5.8 million. So this is almost a doubling of the actual liability of that. It totally wipes out their CPA increase and then more. As Mr. Jessen alluded to, thanks for the $80 million, but also this totally just goes way over it. Beltrami County, which this committee knows I have a soft spot for, this is a really tough county. They're one property tax-based poor. They have the highest property tax rate year over year. They have a significant part of their property, which is larger than many states, that is completely tax exempt and receives no PILT payments for it, unlike other counties that have a lot of tax exempt properties. And they have huge high service needs with some of the highest average or lowest average median and individual household incomes in the state. For this county, who already, just based on that story, does not have an ability to pick up an additional property tax burden, it would be a 9% automatic levy in their property tax. It goes without saying that I get a call from their administrators and county commissioners almost on a daily basis just saying, where are we with this budget proposal? It is very deeply concerning to folks like this. Ramsey County is the last one that I put on here. A $13 million impact in disability waivers, 1.7 on the Minnesota sex offenders cost share increase, 1.1 million on the behavioral health fund, 1.4 million on the competency restoration shift, for a total of $17.8 million levy increase that would potentially be a 4.7 automatic levy increase. And again, we're saying these increases before COLAs, before our collective bargaining agreements go into effect, before health insurance premiums change, which, to give you an example, you might spin the wheel and get nothing, but I've seen counties this year have gotten 20% health insurance increases. And again, that's a huge levy driver. And before any other mandates that we're talking about or changes in programmatic things from the legislature. Fillmore County, Mr. Chair, I rushed to get you your example too for your county. Their assessment of the cost implications for Fillmore County was $1.1 million. Fillmore County's CPA increase in 2023 was $280,000. So almost a multiplier of 4 they're getting their CPA out, potentially wiped out by. Well, I didn't mean to take the air out of the room, but we'll go towards some of the positives.
Rub it in.
We'll go towards some of the positives here. I think that this committee is just, it has a tremendous amount of resources, amazing nonpartisan staff, and just good conversations about property tax burden. Even if we don't have a property tax committee, a lot of you care deeply about it and understand the systems very well. I think our big message this year is beware of adding property tax burden. You all have heard it in your communities. Folks are critically sensitive right now to property tax burdens. In addition, help us with addressing some of the mandates that we really do need help, that are coming down the pike either this coming year or already have. One of them, and this is not the Health and Human Services Committee, as Mr. Jessen says, but a lot of these things still have implications to tax policy, the values that you all hold, and an impact on property taxes. One of them that we're going to be asking for resources on is the African American Family Preservation Act and Child Welfare Disproportionality Act. It's a big acronym, but you've probably heard this from your counties right now. This is a historic generational changing child protection law that was passed in 2024. It will go into effect soon. We need the resourcing to make that work. And if not, we're very concerned about potential outcomes there. Paid leave, we're working with folks on a list of specific requests regarding paid leave and the unique situation that local governments find themselves on with collective bargaining. Systems modernization, and this is where it isn't in your slide, but I had to be a little bit greedy here. I'm gonna just get on a pedestal for a second. When we talk about making counties be our social safety net services, helping folks and families and individuals in their worst of time, it is abhorrent what we give our counties in terms of state infrastructure to do that job. In the screen in front of you right now, it's not in your packets, this is called the green screen. Counties, every single day, workers across the state log in to try to help people access benefits and enter this system. It is literally a DOS-based system out of your worst nightmares of the 1980s, and we are still using it.
You said DOS?
Yes. And we are still using it. We are asking social service workers to get on here to spend a ridiculous portion of their day not helping individuals and families, but going through this green screen. It's abhorrent. We have been asking for the state to invest in this resource. And if we want to talk about efficiencies in the system or saving money, we'd be pointing to this. Get us good technology. The other one that I'd point to is even sadder. If any of you have had the opportunity, and I would encourage you to do this, it would be to sit in with one of your counties on an intake system of the SSIS system. This is the Child Protection System. Our folks, and I sat in on a couple of these, they are tear breaking, they are tear evoking, they're not fun to sit in on. But what you are seeing is people who are doing this job because they care so deeply about individuals and families. And when they are entering their system, they often come across the wheel of death, is what they call it. They're entering their system, the family names, they're having to do it multiple times, and then all of a sudden they're seeing a cursor that just scrolls and scrolls. And by the time it's done scrolling, everything has been wiped out. So folks who are spending their entire time trying to help individuals and families are going home on weekends, pulling into their systems at night when they put their kids to bed to put in these inputs because they don't want to do it during the day. I appreciate Jesse Van Berkel from the Star Tribune actually writing about this, because when we say systems modernization, most people gloss over, oh, whatever, it's just IT they're talking about. No, these are the systems that are impacting our kids and families every day. and we're begging the legislature to do something about it. Ms. Van Berkel from the Star Tribune did a huge editorial or a page on this, and one of my favorite quotes is this. I'm going to read it and then be done. Scott County's Child Protection Division has had a 40 to 50% employee turnover rate. This is not unique to Scott County. Every one of my staff have left, either attribute this to SSIS as the primary driver or the secondary reason. We're losing people we can't even find in the first place because of these systems. This is my favorite takeaway. One morning, DHS staff members visited Scott County. They had planned to do a sit-in with county workers and see what it's like to work with the technology. Unfortunately, the system was down the entire time they were there. So those are our asks, and I do appreciate, Mr. Chair, the latitude, because it is not technically a tax issue. But when we're talking about property tax implications, these systems are driving some of those very costs. And then the last thing is, from me, and then Nathan will take over, is assessor safety. You've probably heard within your own communities of a lot of interactions with government have gotten heightened. There's a lot more sensitivity around it. There's a lack of confidence in a lot of government institutions. There's sometimes security threats that we've seen from anything from elections, but also down to assessing. Folks generally don't love an assessor coming around their properties and being there and then asking also to enter inside and take a value too. And so we've seen some harassment issues. We've seen escalation of danger. It's one thing that we are trying to work with the department on to see if we can have flexibility on that quintile rule of every 5 years having an in-person inspection. We have a lot of really good technology where we can scan and see satellite imagery, et cetera. Is there really a need, especially in those particularly dangerous situations, to send assessors out and potentially be suspect to a dangerous incident?
Mr. Jessen.
Thank you. And so I just wanted to conclude with some other thoughts here. We have a bullet, be watchful of further eroding the tax base. Now, there's lots of sympathetic proposals that this committee may hear on kind of creating shifts or exclusions or rate cuts in the property tax system, but it's always important to remember, and Mr. Hilgard talked about this earlier, that the property tax system works much differently than the income tax system, right? When you're providing a benefit over here, it's being shifted onto other businesses and homeowners in the property tax jurisdiction in the county. So those things need to be, you need to take a close eye when you look at those proposals and not only consider them in a vacuum. Okay, how big a shift does this create onto the other property taxpayers? But think about, okay, how big a shift does this create, and how big a shift is everything else creating that the committee's hearing this year, and how big a shift already exists in current law? So those are real issues that we can have with the property tax system. My friends, the assessors, would be upset with me if I didn't mention that we have serious concerns about any limited market value proposals. When you say, okay, we're just going to limit the amount that a property can increase in value 1 year and put an arbitrary cap on there, it creates real long-term impacts to the system that are hard to get away from, and you end up oftentimes creating problems that you were trying to solve in the first place. So that's something that we would have real concerns about. I did mention some really big concerns with the governor's budget earlier. There was one component which we were happy to see him address, and this is in response to the Alliance versus Hennepin County court case that the state Supreme Court ruled on last March. That created an issue where essentially tenants of low-income housing potentially have to pay personal property taxes directly, which is a really big problem. The Department of Revenue's proposal does address that component of the problem, but the shift is still, if the DOR proposal were enacted, we would still be dealing with the property tax shift, and those tenants would be still losing their renter's credit. So that's still kind of an issue we'd like to talk with you more about. And just the last note is don't forget counties. Mr. Hilgard's talked a lot about all the work the counties do on the state spending side, and on the property tax administration side. If you're looking at a property tax proposal, we're the ones administering the system. And our homeowners and businesses are going to have an impact if you're talking about providing a benefit to one type of taxpayer over another. So there's always going to be an impact to counties when you're talking about property taxes. So if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and kind of get our input on any proposal that this committee may consider. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, and Mr. Jessen, I'm going to suggest the committee take you up on what you just said. Mr. Hilgard, how long have you been with the counties? AMC?
Mr. Chair, I hit my 10-year mark.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Jessen, before you were Commissioner Markwart's CA when he was tax year, correct?
That is correct, Mr.
I
Chair.
was trying to think before that, were you with the department?
Yes, I worked at the Department of Revenue for 5 years.
Okay. When we'd ask you questions, if you have a position on an issue, what would you say?
Mr. Chair, I cannot speak for the commissioner anymore.
Okay, okay. Hey, so we've got two very experienced gentlemen here that are now both working in some capacity for the county. So we'll go to questions, and then we also have another presentation from the League of Minnesota Cities. But I do want to get some questions here, and I would also say what Mr. Justice said at the end there. If you have questions, these are the two gentlemen to really go to. They will get you answers right away. They always have, for me anyway. So, okay, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've talked to you guys so much, I have to go back and remind myself what your last names are. So, Mr. Hilgard and Mr. Jensen. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for bringing up the issue regarding CPA again. I know we touched on it on Tuesday regarding when it came with cannabis aid, and that came up. And the thought that CPA was going to the counties, so that should take care of taking away the cannabis aid. But in talking to the counties last night and being reminded, there is going to be significant expenses at the counties, both from inspections, public health, public safety, that is going to be put onto the sheriff's departments and community service and all that stuff. So it's important that we recognize that while counties are appreciative of the CPA, it's never enough. And it's always, as you showed, taking back more than you're actually giving. So it's extremely challenging. And it's very important as we get to that too, because last night I went and attended a presentation done by Washington County, which was done by the Community Development Association in Washington County, that really put some details into the effect of property taxes and the costs of Washington County, and especially with the seniors. They started talking about the seniors, and debt among senior households is growing, where the household costs in Washington County for seniors is $40,000, which is $19 an hour. Their average Social Security retirement payment is only $24,000. So you can see they're going into, and it was, my district was called out as the amount of seniors going into debt and going backwards in my district, which is actually a very good example of Washington County, because it goes from the south all the way up to the north, is really affecting it. Monthly mortgages are up to $3,200 a month now on new homes when they're purchasing it. So the entry cost barriers are $62 an hour and a significant down payment to get into a home there. And so, and then when you start talking about the rents, rents are $1,600 on average. And again, this is Washington County, which is a mismatch between resident wages and rents, because it's $2 an hour for affordability. 49% of renters are cost burden. 78% of seniors cost burden of seniors in our community. So it's important that we take into account when we're doing these and make it and affecting property taxes. It is hitting people that are already over the limit, what they're supposed to be having. And in a lot of these seniors, especially in Washington County, and you probably know that in probably other counties, people are in their homes, that's multi-generations in their homes. These are people that have not just moved into homes, but have been there for, their whole life. And their homes are going up in value, the taxes are going up in value, and now seniors are getting to be a higher and higher level of of being homeless, because they're getting priced out of their homes. Nothing that they've done, it's just property taxes and cost of living has taken them over. So I just, as a former commissioner, I just want to, everybody has a cause. They come down, and I said one of my causes is to make sure counties are heard, how actions down here are being felt, that moving costs from one bucket to another bucket So you can say that you've reduced costs or taxes is really hurting at the county level. And that's where people are seeing it on the property taxes, and that's what we're hearing as we're going door to door. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. And members, in your packets, I find this kind of interesting, the preliminary 2026 county program aid. So you might want to pull that out and keep that. So Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about slide 8. And so if you want to go back to the graph about county levy increases, I know you talked a little bit about that and how, whether it's a reduction in aid or new mandates, it might affect that. I wanted to go back to just the dips, and I was wondering if you could explain that. I mean, because I think it looks like, do you have it? Okay. In 2020, there's a dip there in both, there's a dip there in the county levies, and it looks like there's another dip, like a big one in about like 2012 and like 2004. Just curious, kind of like what drove those?
Mr. Jessen.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to preface my answer with saying there's no one answer. Right, that there's a lot of different things that drive these. I would say when you're looking at the 2021 dip, a lot of that was the economic uncertainty that not only counties but also homeowners and county constituents were facing at the time. So counties were very cautious with any potential levy increases that year. It's not like there were no limits in place or anything like that. That was all just county decision-making at the local level. And I think that there's kind of a similar explanation for if you're looking around 2011. That was just, we were in a different time coming out of the Great Recession. Though at that same time, we were also recovering from kind of significant reductions in county program aid that happened in the latter half of the previous decade. So there's a lot of different moving parts there. There's no one answer, but sometimes those are some components of it, I guess I would say.
Representative Lee.
Yeah, just a really short follow-up. I guess my question is just, I'm curious how the influx of federal aid to cities and counties during COVID might have affected that 2020 part, but then also I'm curious because then the levies increased like very significantly after that, and in the other previous dips they didn't, and so I'm just curious if you have a comment on that. If not, that's okay.
Mr. Jessen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say federal aid was certainly another factor, right? And counties' ability to keep levies lower at that time. I would say as far as like why was there a more significant increase immediately afterward, I mentioned inflation is a big factor. Like when we don't really talk about the state budget the same way, increasing percentage-wise every year, the way that we do with levies, with county and city levies. There's a report that comes out every year that says, here's how much, these levies have increased on average compared to last year, and here's the dollar-to-dollar difference, right? And that's just kind of, the inflation was a significant factor in the increases following, as well as, different things that went on at that time. I don't know if Mr. Hilgart, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was great. Okay, Representative Lee.
Oh, and then so would attaching an inflator to CPA have kind of like mediate this like significant increase? Just curious. That's my last question, Mr. Chair.
I don't care if it's your last question. I care about inflators, unless they're good ones. Yeah. Who would like that question?
We'd love that. Yeah, we love that. I know. As your partner in governance, we would absolutely love that. But it is something I know this committee has talked about, and just the difficulty of funding that, and that especially in the. That is a policy priority of all of our organizations, and probably will be until the end of time.
Nothing to add there, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jessen. Okay.
Yeah.
Representative Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I mean, and if you'll indulge, I have a second question about a separate issue. You mentioned the African American Family Preservation Act. Last year, I was in the Children and Families Committee that I guess saw this bill, and also provided funding to both Hennepin and Ramsey to start out the program. It was phased in, so those were the first two counties to kind of implement and see how this would work. And so I understand there is a report coming out soon, right, about how much this might cost for the rest of the 87 counties. And so just curious if you have thoughts on that and want to talk a little bit more about that upcoming report.
Mr. Hilgert?
Mr. Chair, Representative Lee, thank you for the question. There was a Legislative Budget Office LBO request, fiscal request. I would say that the fiscal request, and this is a tough question to answer in a systemic way for that office, so I want to give them kudos for approaching it. They did reach out to us. Unfortunately, it doesn't make any clear, this is the average cost per county. But what I would say, and I would love to follow up with you, is we actually do have specific county assessments of ranges of how much this costs. In fact, there are several counties in this room. Otter Tail has sent us that request. The big difference in this act, as you might recall too, is that we are changing to a requirement of active efforts. And active efforts, I want to say, this is something within our association, 87 counties. You would think there's a lot of diversity of thought here. Our policy position right now is that this is the right act to do. This is the right thing to do for kids and family, but we have to support it. We also can't expect counties to be potentially almost doubling some of their child protection caseworkers, getting new training, and not having resources or the systems, which you saw are woefully incompetent, to actually support that work. And if we're asking counties to double and do the active efforts, which is a significant increase in caseload time to every single individual case without resources, we talked about the governor's levy increases. We're talking about complementary levy increases there, and that's assuming that you could find staffing for these in some of these counties. So it is something that while the LBO's analysis doesn't give a statewide budget impact, we were hopeful that it would have been at least draw some examples and be able to say for these three counties, this is what they've said it will be. We have some of that data and would really look to, whether it's not in this committee, but potentially Children and Families this year or others, we are going around trying to talk and make bipartisan efforts to try to support this act. That is our top funding request this year and priority. And if it's not funded, I think I want to be clear too, we have deep concerns about what this means for actual implementation.
Representative Lee?
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wiener?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, with the DOS system that you mentioned earlier, does that program still have Oregon Trail included?
We cured dysentery.
Okay, now I'll get serious.
I thought you were.
No, the question actually, what refers to Representative Lee. So one of my local counties actually estimates that program, the AAFPA, would cost that county about $1 million. And that's about 12%, if I recall correctly, of their budget or their levy increase. Is that an accurate number compared to other counties that you're hearing of? And then I have another question, comment, statement after that.
Mr. Hilgert?
Mr. Chair and others, I would say there are always ranges, but yes, I've heard anything from a 5% to a 15% levy increase potential for this. And I think also not just the money, it's the support we're needed, the training support, the system support, and frankly, these positions are really tough to fill right now. I think that's one of our biggest concerns is that child protection workers are not abundant. Their jobs are very hard. And we can't fill these positions right now. Equally so, a lot of the county attorney offices have said it will be increasing caseload management for them. And so I think for Wadena County, they're losing attorneys. They're having a tough time filling them. So it's just a question of, we get this mandate, are we going to be able to successfully do it? Again, this all comes back down to children and families. So we want to make sure we get this right. It's supported, and we're truly having the outcomes that I think this was a bipartisan act. It was supported in a bipartisan fashion. That we set ourselves up for success like the legislature expects us to be.
Representative Wiener, what's the total budget of that county? You said Wadena?
Yes,
Do you know about what it is, or?
23 million maybe?
Okay, so that's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah. And I
You have the
apologize
floor.
if I don't know that number.
No, that's fine.
But I
have no
believe
idea what
it's
mine is.
somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay.
The other question I have is, and it kind of goes off of what Representative Johnson had talked about earlier, is a shift of tax burden. sometimes we have to look at history to figure out where we started and how we got here. There was the Minnesota Miracle where we transferred the budget from the state, which was mainly coming from property taxes, and we shifted it from that to income tax and corporate taxes. And if I recall correctly, and I have some numbers written down here, that was like 53% of the state's budget actually came from property taxes, and now it's up to about 32. So we got rid of, and we supposedly fixed a problem. We put CPA, LGA into place to help take care of some of those issues. And we're heading back in the same direction where we're just shifting that burden back onto the property taxes. I mean, is that an accurate assessment?
Mr. Hilgert?
I think Mr. Jessen and I would say unequivocally yes. And I think you're also, the base has changed too. That pie is getting smaller and smaller. It's easy, you know, we talked a little bit about this with the exclusions and shifts or tax rate reductions, but it's easy especially to say, hey, we're providing a new benefit, there's no fiscal note attached to it, but really you're also eroding the tax base size. So I think that you're absolutely right with the state historic increase in mandates, inflationary costs, et cetera. But it's also that we're relying more on property taxpayers to fund our government, and there's less of them, if that makes sense. The base is shrinking a little bit. And we've talked about that, and I want to say this chamber in particular has been the last 2 years very supportive of that premise of beware of shifts, beware of exclusions, beware of tax rate reductions. We want to thank you because we know it's hard, and constituents and good causes come to you and say, do this exemption or increase this exclusion. And everyone goes, absolutely, like we care about your issue. But to show restraint and being able to say we can't pass the buck to other property tax owners is equally important.
Representative Weiner?
So with that, are we putting Minnesota in a terrible situation here? When the states around us look at our taxes going up, property, sales, income, corporate tax, and they're decreasing, what is the cause and effect? Are we seeing a net migration of people? And so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, and I apologize. No, I don't.
I think the chair is eagerly wanting to answer that one.
Yeah, I think we'll kick that
Are
one
we
back
seeing
to
who's
Drawing the short straw here.
Yeah.
So any of the testifiers? Okay. Representative Weiner?
Good question.
Whoever
Any
would
other-
like to answer that, I would like to hear.
Oh, Mr. Chair, we don't really track that data or those numbers.
It's a fair question, but I'd have to think about that one. And we don't track, I haven't done a national assessment on, to really give an answer and response that you're asking for.
Just anecdotal evidence, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but when South Dakota says, and their governor puts up billboards that say, come to South Dakota, we're ready to take your business. I mean, I would think that this is a pretty fair idea that we're driving businesses and people out of this state with our tax structure right now. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hilgert, who services DOS? I mean, when I first started the insurance business in '82, we had DOS. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever. Now it's not so great.
There's almost a hipster culture around it now too, because there's people that are really proud of it, and you know, it's almost like a unique language to be able to operate in DOS-based systems. And so it is interesting, but it's something where we have to find a solution on this. And I appreciate the bipartisan interest in it. We did give the state several hundreds of millions of dollars in 2023 for systems modernization. And I think I'm hopeful some of those committees with that jurisdiction will take, let's really prioritize SSIS and Maxis as those investments.
Okay. Representative Weiner, did you have anything else right now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question to both of you. You had the slide that talked about Lockport County particularly receiving $800,000 in county program aid, and then the dip through the mid-teens, and then kind of a little bit of a return. Do you get, overlaid with that would be interesting, as you create that graph, would be total valuations of property within the county as well. And then any other essential shifts that would have been happening from the state. So new asks for you as well. So, if we're returning to where we were currently, but what are we also asking you to do that we haven't asked you to do in the past? And then what are your total valuations? And if we see a slip in valuations, how are counties prepared to start addressing that? Thanks.
Mr. Hilgert?
That's a great point. We'll take note of that, Representative Swazinski, and I appreciate you letting us use your county as an example because honestly, I think Chair David's bill in 2015 was trying to address your dip because there were 27 counties who had fell off the CPA formula. A big part of it because they were deemed too property tax rich, even though their median family household incomes were well below average because of their farm prices were high on paper and low population, they were deemed to be wealthy and didn't get any part of that aid. So that's where you see that correction back in 2017, 18, all of a sudden that readjustment, and that was due to this committee's work.
The gentleman from Lyon. Okay, Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More comments than questions, but fun fact, DOS stands for Disk Operating System. Bill Gates bought it from the inventor and then kind of peddled it to IBM as the operating system for the first IBM PCs. That's how he made his first million. So that's how old it is. Second, piling on this is going to be bipartisan, but if you go back and look at the historical record, every time the state gets into financial difficulties, it basically solves part of the problem by pushing it down to the cities and counties, and I hope we don't do that this time. I think this committee will probably be the guardians against that. And Mr. Hilgart will appreciate the fact that last night I literally fell asleep reading at page 51 of the DHS modernization. So we can talk about it. Well, it took me several days to get to 50. So I actually fell asleep at pages 23, 42, and 50.
Thank you.
Representative Elkins. Okay, thank you, sir. Let's go to Representative Harder, then Anderson, then Gomez, and then I think we will, unless there's other questions. And again, ask these two gentlemen, get their number, put them on speed dial, because they're very good resources. Okay, Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Davids. I do have you on speed dial. While I could talk about the mandates and the one-size-fits-all, and some of the mandates that pass work for some counties and they don't work for other counties, I'm just gonna leave that at there. But my comment, and this may not be directly towards the tax committee, but maybe towards other committees and agencies of the impacts of our levies, and that's what I would call the unseen costs of doing business that affects the levies. And I'm just going to give you two examples, and I'll just leave them at that, and you can comment if you want. If you don't, that's fine too. So counties are required to do assessments for a variety of reasons. And sometimes these assessments will take up to 4 hours of an employee's time for an assessment when there's been no change in somebody's life. So if you think about that, 4 hours times, I don't know, 100 people. I mean, these are the real costs that will affect our levies. We should keep that in mind too, that the unseen costs, as I would call it. Another example I want to give is that agencies will provide guidance, right? Something gets passed, they provide guidance. The employees are trying to figure out what that guidance is, and wouldn't you know that the agency decides to send additional guidance, right? And sometimes on that guidance on one particular piece, whatever it is, the agency could send 10, 15 notices of guidance on the same thing. And that really does affect the county and its work for its people, because here again, they're spending more time trying to figure out what the agency is wanting the county to do. So there is a lot into levies, and it is property values, a lot of things, but these are the other things that also are a part of the pie that affect the levy. So thank you for all that you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Harder. And I just want to go back to Representative Elkins' comments, and I hope the committee as a whole will pay attention to what he said, because as we go through the bills, and I know we're not counting money now, but eventually we will. to watch out, how does this affect counties, cities, townships? Because I think Representative Elkins hit it right on the head. We get in a little bind here and well, you guys pay for it. And we're pretty good at that, but I think we gotta watch that a lot closer. Okay, Representative Anderson and Gomez. Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I have two quick questions and a fun fact. Apartment values, you said they're down 2 or 3%, I can't remember. Why? Is it, are rents flat and expenses have gone up slightly? Is the vacancies changed? Usually they're based on, net income, so
Mr. Jessen.
what do you know?
Yeah, Representative Anderson, Mr. Chair, that's a great question. I'm not, and again, there's a lot of different factors that go into valuations. I would say that, apartment values are lower in Ramsey and, decreased more in Ramsey and Hennepin County than the rest of the state on average. But I can't give you a specific reason why. I'm just looking at the data kind of and seeing what it's like in different parts of the state, so.
Representative Anderson.
Okay, that'd be really interesting. TIF districts, so a lot of the commercial properties downtown are in TIF districts, and what's happening, it's got to affect big time what's happening.
Mr. Hilgert.
That's a great question. TIF districts are built on some assumptions too, and when those assumptions aren't met, it can question the viability of those TIF districts. I think that's a great thing to follow up on too, for this issue, as well as when Mr. Jessen alluded to the Alliance versus Hennepin County case on deeply affordable rental units exemptions. If that shift occurs, there could also be TIF district impact from that as well. So it's a really good question. I haven't had the opportunity to look into that before today's hearing, but you've piqued my interest for sure.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Yeah, that could be an exploding problem down the road. And I have a fun thing. So my mother was a programmer for the DNR, and of course she retired about 20 years ago. But she worked on DOS, and I think Cobalt. Does that ring a bell? Cobalt, right? Is that
Actually, Cobalt is older.
I think it was older. Yeah. So she was one of the last Cobalt or DOS programmers in the state before she retired, and she ended up contracting back. But I want to tell you a funny story about my family. My mom worked on the program that linked you used to have to co-sign student loans for your kids. It wasn't through the federal government. And they were co-signed on somebody's loan, it wasn't mine. She worked on the program that linked that to the Department of Revenue. It was one of the last things done through Cobalt. And long story short, their state tax return fund got taken because one of my younger siblings was behind on a student loan payments. And that was the end. She said that was the end. She's done working on these computer systems. But that was what she did.
Yeah.
So.
Representative Freiberg, then Gomez.
Really important comment, as long as we're trading DOS and Oregon Trail stories. Fun fact, Oregon Trail was developed in House District 43B. The original developers lived in an apartment in Crystal at the time they came up with the idea.
Wow.
Thank you.
Representative Gomez, save us.
Speaking of MS-DOS, no, not speaking of MS-DOS. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate this presentation today, and some good, thoughtful conversation about the state and local fiscal relationship in Minnesota. I think that we have a tendency, even in this committee, where we do, we have pretty wide-ranging conversations, but we tend to think about taxes in isolation. And, and there's sort of this reflexive reaction to a discussion about taxes that regardless of political party, we all kind of have, like, tax is bad, they should be lower. But taxes buy things that people need. And when we think about taxes from an isolated ideological position, we often miss that fact, that taxes buy things that people need and buy the things that keep government going. And when we talk about keeping government going, we're talking about emergency response when you call 911, roads being paved, streetlights coming on, basic government services. That's what counties and cities do. We'll hear from the cities later. And, I didn't really, before I became tax chair, didn't think a lot about the state and local fiscal relationship in Minnesota, but I learned a lot about it over the last couple of years. And, Chair Listagard's in the audience, and particularly in the property tax division and in the property tax area, the importance of this relationship and the interplay between decisions that we make in this body, in these seats, and decisions that our local partners have to make is really, really highlighted. So we talked about the Minnesota Miracle a little bit. We restrict cities and counties' ability to raise money. And we do that for a good reason. Because a decision was made that the quality of a kid's education shouldn't depend on their zip code. That in our state constitution, the state government has a responsibility to provide an education to every kid in Minnesota. And if we do not take that seriously as state lawmakers, we just put it all onto the local governments and the school districts. And what that means is that a kid in Crystal and a kid in Edina have a very different shot at a good education. And in the 70s, we made a decision, like, we don't want that kind of system. We want a system where, that's why we restrict cities and counties' abilities to raise money to these sort of regressive tax tools of property taxes, which is one of the more regressive taxes that we have. The property tax refund makes it better, but there is no income sensitivity on the front end of property taxes. We have some of these local taxes. But we made a decision that the state has progressive taxation tools, the income tax and corporate taxes, which are a more equitable and fair way to fund the basic services that everybody needs. Especially, not for my city, because I live in Minneapolis, we have the wherewithal to provide for our own services, but especially in areas across the state that do not have the tax base that Minneapolis or St. Paul or Edina or Maple Grove or other places have. So, there is a direct relationship between the decisions that we make and the decisions that we put our local partners in. And there is an appeal to property tax exemptions, to market value exclusions. It doesn't cost us anything. Zero general fund costs. We look at our spreadsheet, it's nothing. And we get to give a goodie to somebody. And so there's like an appeal to saying, oh, well, seniors have this property tax burden that's really hard for them to bear, and we like them, so we're gonna, exempt them we're gonna give a senior market value exclusion, we're gonna give a veterans market value exclusion, we're going to make it so, you see proposals all the time, I'm sure we have several of them, to exempt seniors altogether from property taxes. But then what are you doing? Then you're shifting it on to, other people. Other people are paying for it within the levy. You're shifting it on to lower income families. You're shifting it on to people who have not reached that age but may have other, financial situations that they're in. So I guess it's like, I know we're not counting money, and I would never count money when the chair told me not to. But it's all fine and good to propose, so far, who's counting but $1.2 billion in tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, and say, hey, look, we're holding true to our low tax principles. But what you are doing when you erode the tax base, when you propose cuts that go to the wealthy, when you do property tax shifts by limiting market value for groups that you think that you like and that you want to give a hand to, is you're making it so that local government partners who don't have the choice, who don't get to sit on our ideological high horse and say, we hate taxes, you're putting them in a situation where they have to make the hard choice. And they have worse tools to do it. And we all hear about the role of property taxes in people's lives. And so I'm just really thankful for this, for this discussion today. And I want us all to keep in mind, right, this final thing. Think about counties. Think about cities. Some of us work for local governments, but all of us have relationships with our local governments. And the decisions that we make when we want to erode the tax base, cut taxes for the rich, et cetera, put them in a position where they have to make the hard choice? And is that really like the courageous thing to do? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was gonna ask you, Chair Gomez, to be on my eliminate the estate tax bill, but I guess I'll probably back off. So, and just to kind of close this up, then we look forward to getting to the city. Thank you, Chair Gomez, for that. When you gave the example, well, first of all, Beltrami County, why is there no PILT? Did I goof that up?
Mr. Chair, thanks for the question. For sovereign tribes who have territory, there is no PILT for that exemption. Red Lake is only one of two, I think, unallotted tribes in the entire nation. And so the contiguous territory of the sovereign nation of Red Lake is completely tax exempt.
That's what we're doing, okay. Okay, but I liked your example of four-house town. I actually represent quite a few of those. Choice, Tawny, Brattsburg, Newburgh, Highland. No, Highland's got 5 houses, so that wouldn't be a good example. So, but that really helped me kind of look at how this affects everything. So, okay, with that being said, thank you, and get their numbers on speed dial. They're very good at what they do. And let's bring the cities up here if we could, please. I've got Beth Johnston, Intergovernmental Relations, League of Minnesota Cities, Pierre Willette, Senior Intergovernmental Relations Language of the Minnesota Cities, or League of Minnesota Cities, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hilgert, thank you, Mr. Jensen. Are you healing up?
Not quite, surgery tomorrow.
Oh, surgery's tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, so you won't be running for a while? I thought about running once. I got over it quite quickly. Mr. Willette, do you remember when you were in my office and you moved a bunch of pencils away?
How could I forget that, Mr. Chair?
Okay. He looked at my pencil thing, they were John Wick pencils. And I don't know if you've ever seen what John Wick does with pencils. Okay, that being said, we're very fortunate today to have League of Minnesota Cities, Beth Johnston, Pierre Willette. Who'd like to go first?
Mr. Chair, I'll just talk about what we're going to talk about today. We'll try to, given the time, we'll try to run through this pretty quickly. And
Now, if you need more time, we'll get you more time.
Great. Well,
We
thank
can
you.
come in at 6 tonight. So, no, I'm not
We'll
coming.
spend a little time talking about the League of Minnesota Cities, what they do, why it's important, some of the priorities for cities this session, and also some challenges we see cities in general. I think the math leads from the counties did a really good job kind of covering kind of similar issues with property taxes and the pressures on locals, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Johnston.
My name is Beth Johnston, for the record. A little bit about the League. So the League is a statewide association representing 841 of 856 cities across the state of Minnesota. 83% of Minnesota's population lives in cities, but they only cover about 6% of the state's land area. We are proud to be the collective voice for cities in Minnesota, but we also work affiliate groups and other organizations that represent segments of our membership. And then another fun fact, our smallest city is the city of Barry in Big Stone County with a population of 16, and our largest city member is the city of Minneapolis in Hennepin County with about 430,000 people. The League was founded in 1913 by a special law passed by the legislature, and then it was initially part of the U of M's Extension Division. But in 1974, it became its own organization. The League provides a lot of services to our members. These include education and training for elected and appointed officials, consulting on governance, HR, land use, contracting, and workplace safety, legal research and assistance, and of course, we also provide legislative representation at the Capitol.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Willette.
A little bit about who we represent. Of course, cities and their elected officials. You see a long list on the slide there. We try to represent the collective interest of those folks through a process that we will touch on in a little bit. We are guided by a board of directors and a executive committee We note that we don't represent cities in individual projects, but we do provide those cities guidance about how to advocate here at the Capitol for their own issues. Beth?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Johnston?
cities do provide many services on behalf of the state. They're listed on this slide, which, by the way, we can send out the slides after this hearing. So the state does put requirements and standards in statute, and the cities do administer the law accordingly. Over time, these duties have expanded, adding new work and complexity for local governments, and also increasing costs of services on property taxes. So the cities do rely on the state-local partnership to fund many of these services for residents. This includes things like elections, operating different polling places and administering elections, transportation, maintaining roads, street lighting, and things like that, public safety, and then also with the environment, the cities are kind of often at the forefront when it comes to preparing and responding to different environmental challenges. And this includes wastewater treatment, drinking water, stormwater treatment, public utility emission reductions, brownfield cleanup, and also protecting shade tree canopy by responding to the emerald ash borer. Cities also maintain parks and libraries and many of the fun things that people often associate their city government with.
You might ask how we...
Mr. Willett?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. I might ask how we come to our platform. It comes from our members as part of an annual process. About 150 local officials spend the months of July, August, and September working and discussing in committees to help form our legislative agenda. One of these committees, the Fiscal Futures Committee, is where our tax priorities will come, and Beth will talk about those priorities in a moment. Obviously, we use our priorities to drive our legislative agenda and respond to the legislation that we get from all of you. We also have some high-level priorities, or some evergreen things that we kind of hold true and deep in our hearts about what it means for cities. They include things like preserving the ever-important state fiscal relationships, which thank you, all of you, for unpacking that for all of us. Our situation is much like the counties in the way in which we interact fiscally with the state. Preserving local decision-making authority, you'll hear a lot from that from the League and other local governments. Opposing unfunded mandates, that's something you also heard from the counties. And working in partnership with our other organizations, especially the local government organizations. We work hand in hand with the great county organizations you just heard of, but also other city organizations like the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, the Municipal Legislative Commission, Minnesota Association of Small Cities, and Metro Cities. And then we're lucky that we rely heavily on some municipal professional organizations. We have at our fingertips groups of city engineers, city planners, city attorneys, economic development people, and others that help us communicate with you and help us present our case on legislation or against legislation, wherever the case may be.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Johnston?
as Mr. Willett mentioned, our board does approve our policies each year. They also help identify the priorities that we will be focusing on for the upcoming legislative session. Those can be seen on this slide, and if you can't read the slide because it's really small font, you can also find it in your packet. We do have policies outside of the tax committee, so if you wanted to talk about those, we are happy to connect you with the right person, but we will just be focusing on the tax committee ones today. So we do appreciate the legislature's partnership with local governments through aid programs. These programs are unique methods to address property taxes without causing shifts onto other property types or relying on taxpayers to file a separate refund, which can be cumbersome. The first main one we talk about is local government aid. This is a general purpose aid that cities can use to meet their own needs. In 2025, 749 cities are receiving aid. This is determined through the formula that was revamped in 2023, and we do appreciate the legislature's partnership on that formula change as well as the increase. As the counties did mention, LGA and CPA have not been indexed to inflation for the last 20 years, and so that is something that we do support as well. Another priority of the league is local sales tax authority. These can be essential in funding regional projects by allowing residents of a city to vote on whether or not they would like to do this as an alternative to property taxes. We do support the work that came out of the 2023 task force on local sales taxes. And along with that too, we do also support the sales tax exemption on construction materials. If you haven't been approached by a city or a county or a school requesting you to have a bill to provide a refund for the sales tax paid on construction of a building, I'm sure someday they will reach out to you.
And just so you know, we run those through Representative Smith.
I never should have made that joke.
I loved it. Okay, Ms. Johnston?
All right. Mr. Chair and members, the last one too that kind of is most relevant to the tax committee is tax increment financing, and that is an important economic development tool for cities, and we support increased flexibility and reviewing that for modernization. And we do want to just echo, we also support a lot of what the counties were saying about being mindful of when many property tax proposals are out there and the shifting that can occur, as they mentioned.
Mr. Willett?
Mr. Chair, I didn't want to miss this opportunity to cover a lot of the challenges that cities are facing, and they're very similar to what you heard from the counties. The pressure on property taxes, which I'm sure all of you heard when you were door knocking this fall, it's real, and it is driven by a number of things that we've already discussed, but also a high demand for service and ever-increasing costs. This is really a problem for local governments, where with inflation is affecting the things that they do, their salaries, the price of materials, pretty much all their costs are rising. Recruitment and retention of employees is a super problem, big problem for local governments. We want to have and good, these incredible resources that we have in these employees. We want to keep them and continue to attract new ones. And then aging infrastructure and the cost of a replacement, it's really not unlike the same issues that are facing the state itself. And so, not to end on just kind of a down note, we want to make sure we talk about some great things about cities. Every day they are delivering services and doing it well. They're innovative. Much of the local government innovation happens in cities. They have to be scrappy because the pressure on their budgets to do new things, and it's a good crucible for new policies and new programs. Incredible. I talked about the employees, but the incredible knowledge and experience, that is something we draw upon to help direct our policies here. But we're very lucky to have such skilled and knowledgeable workforce that not just help our cities run well, but also help us stay informed about what's best practices at cities. They also have you, all of you as representatives. You all have cities in your district. They have you as great advocates, and I'm certain you'll hear from them in the coming weeks. We have our City Day coming up on March 6th, I believe, and an army of local government people will descend upon the Capitol and talk to you about the things that are high in their priorities. And with that, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
And we will get right to questions, but I have to say, when I was Mayor of Preston, I went to the statewide League of Minnesota Cities meeting. It's up 94. I think it was Alexandria. What else is up that way?
St. Cloud.
Fergus Falls.
No, Fergus Falls. It was either Fergus Falls or Alexandria. It wasn't St. Cloud. And we sat down and had lunch, and I sat by a gentleman that I found to be quite fascinating, actually. And we had quite a time, quite a discussion, and it was the mayor of Brooklyn Park or Center. It was Jesse Ventura. Which one was it?
Park.
And I thought, wow, that guy's really something. We had a great time. So that we will get to questions, but first of all, would be the counties or the cities, township school boards. You do a lot of heavy lifting, and you probably don't hear it all the time, but I appreciate it, and I'm sure the members of this committee do, working with you, and I'm blessed. The county commissioners that I work with and cities and school boards are just amazing people. They do a good job. And so thank you from the counties and the cities for all that you do.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that comment. And those are the types of people that we rely on to help drive our policies here. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So, but no inflators. Okay, no inflators. But we're not talking about money. So with that, questions from members for the cities, Mr. Willett or Ms. Johnston? Well, thank you very, very much. Any wrap up for today, Chair Gomez? Does the department have a position on this? Okay. So with that, I'd just like to go over next week's schedule here. Tuesday, we're going to finish up House File 4. That's the Johnson Bill, Constitutional Amendment, and then House File 173, Robbins, R&D. Then Wednesday, we have the Joy Bill, and then we have Representative Swazinski, the gentleman from Lyons Bill, House File 9, and then Norris. This is a good one. Oh, I can't see that, can I?
You can say it.
Okay. The indebtedness due through coercion, we got to get that done. And then Thursday, data centers, and then we're going to be we've got some requests finally, we've got some good DFL bills coming through. So they will be, these are the ones we have locked in right now, but there'll be some more DFL bills. We're getting some sales tax exemptions and different things. So we want to hear as many of those as we can. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, good government all the time, we're adjourned.